Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here, and today I'm going to be recording another episode of Jin'talks. Specifically, I'm going to be going over everything that I managed to miss in August whilst I was busy with the Alliance Tournament and the CSM, as quite a lot has gone down in Nullsec politics. And I can't just do that with a picture of my face, so let's just get right into it and take a look at the map itself. Now, the first thing to cover follows directly on from my last video where I talked about the Imperium's march into the north, where, much like most northern expeditions in Game of Thrones, things have not gone as planned, with the Imperium failing to secure a proper beachhead in Hakonan under heavy opposition from the Pan-Fam coalition, losing multiple fortizars and fleets of typhoons in the process. Meanwhile, the parallel Sov offensives in Pureblind and Veil of the Silent were met with limited initial impact, but then quickly blunted as the war progressed and the Imperium's ability to pressure on multiple fronts quickly diminished, leaving no real lasting damage to the North's ability to provide for its renters and members. The full collapse of the Northern War, however, came later, as Test finally decided to de-deploy from the North in the end of August. This reduced the war to a single front, with the Imperium facing off against both Pan-Fam and Guardians of the Galaxy coalition, without their super fleet to back them up. And just quickly, thanks to everyone who pointed out my mistake in my previous update where I suggested that the Imperium had brought their super fleet north. This was in fact incorrect, and I had just seen a few Titans and gotten overexcited. Please do not hesitate to make corrections like that again in the future, I do appreciate it. During this conflict, it also became increasingly apparent that the Imperium's initial tactical plan of using dread bombs against northern supers in order to reduce their advantages there proved completely ineffective versus massed force auxiliaries. In my opinion, this is best exemplified by the Nalvula fight, wherein a trap laid by both Goonswarm Federation and snuffed out led to the destruction of 159 dreadnoughts, trading back for only 86 force auxiliaries and killing exactly 0 Titans or supers from the Pan-Fam coalition in the process. Although it should be noted that Pan-Fam's super capital dominance here is absolutely overwhelming, bringing over 200 super capital class vessels to the engagement, allowing them to quickly dismantle the attacking forces whilst they were stuck attempting to destroy the force auxiliary reserves that Pan-Fam could bring to the field, as it proved nigh impossible to break a Titan or supercarrier under force auxiliary reps. During this conflict, Initiative, another alliance of the Imperium, was able to seize NC. Money moons in the region of Syndicate relatively uncontested. However, with moon changes coming and the Imperium pulling back from Hakonan, the question of how useful this was strategically and how long they'll be able to hold them lingers. All the way on the other side of the map in the south, however, the Phoenix Federation, an FCON-led coalition, was put under heavy pressure from both the Tri-led Vanguard coalition and some allies such as Fraternity, both of whom had cut their DRF ties in recent months. This led to the Phoenix Federation fully merging in with the DRF to become a part of that greater coalition and extend their reach into the south for the benefit of being given protection from these harassing forces. This move was then followed by a small but sustained campaign of harassment from mid-sized entities such as Skill Yourself and Nullsec Shalopen against Fraternity and the Vanguard coalition, targeting both Ratters, Renters, and even Sov structures. One can't help but speculate that this is possibly the result of mercenary contracts on the DRF's part, something they are well known for within the sphere of EVE politics. This expansion of the DRF only caused further diplomatic issues within the nascent Legacy Coalition, as plans had originally been laid by the coalition during its eviction of the Stainwagon forces from the south to take Fetherbolus at a later date. Details on exactly how or why this was supposed to take place vary from source to source, but the concern comes from a split between the two major forces within the Legacy Coalition, both Test Alliance Please Ignore and Circle of Two, on how to approach it. With Test aiming to take the region through patience and diplomacy, having set up agreements with Solar on the matter, and CO2 wishing to expedite the process through judicious use of spaceship violence. This difference in approaches led to friction within the Legacy Coalition, which was only heightened as CO2 took matters into their own hands, partnering with Tri and Fraternity to form a non-legacy coalition that aimed to take on the ex-Phoenix Federation in Tenerifis and Amensi, as well as supporting their previous claims to faith abolish by force. All of this friction culminated with a secret late-night vote amongst the other members of the Legacy Coalition, in which the decision was made to remove CO2 from the coalition, leading to a mutual resetting of Test, Brave, Tickle, Drone Walkers, and CO2, leaving them without their previous legacy allies in case of an external invasion, along with a whole host of new enemies. This decision has multiple political threads tying into it, and one that hasn't been particularly talked about on Reddit, but is arguably the most important, is the fact that Test actually has an existing deal to protect FCON and, by extension, the Phoenix Federation should they need assistance. In addition to this, Test has also forged agreements with the Drone Region Federation in order to allow them to briefly stage an MTO in order to attack the Guardians of the Galaxy Coalition, the terms of which reportedly required them to defend the DRF from Triumvirate should they attack in the future. This placed Test in the situation where they had to choose between their coalition mate, who had helped them take their space, and their existing political agreements with other entities which surrounded them. With Test's stance on the matter made evidently clear by their reset, this leaves CO2 as effectively encircled by their enemies, with their original opponents to the east still standing strong, and previous allies now hostile to them on the west. Crucially, this cuts off CO2 from their ability to extract from the south, given that Catch, the main logistical highway out of the area, is owned by Test, who are now effectively hostile to CO2, leaving them with basically nowhere to run. In addition to this, CO2 has few outside entities to look to for support, especially given their relationship with the Imperium following the wake of World War B, who still see them as traitors and backstabbers, a wound which is only further prodded at by the name of their renter alliance, Band of Backstabbers, and its gloriously named CEO, Traitorous Backstabber. This leaves only one major option for CO2 in terms of outside support, and that is the forces of the North. And in fact, it wouldn't be entirely out of the question for CO2 to hire Pandemic Legion, given that they are at their core a mercenary alliance. However, in a post-fatigue world, Pandemic Legion's mercenary capabilities are somewhat stunted, as they can't just move their supers into position, or at least not without risking their holdings in the north. In addition, it's doubtful that Pandemic Legion alone could save this new breakaway coalition. It's likely that support from other northern entities, such as the Guardians of the Galaxy Coalition, would be required in order for them to hold their own in this fight. Although given Test's recent deployment up north specifically to hit the Guardians of the Galaxy Coalition, which CO2 did not directly support, it would not be out of the question for a nice bound of vengeance from the Guardians of the Galaxy Coalition, although that is just speculation. One minor interesting quirk of the breakup of the Legacy Coalition comes from the fact that CO2 has in fact transferred one of the citadels that they previously held in Catch, where the majority of the minor alliances in the Legacy Coalition reside, to an outside entity, more specifically Doom Chinchilla. When asked for comment, Doom Chinchilla had this to say. At this early stage in the war, we still have a lot of questions hanging over it, however. First of all, we simply just don't know how much the remains of the Legacy Coalition will commit to fighting CO2. We have seen the start of full-scale mobilization, and all parties have sent out rhetoric and updates that clearly indicate a war footing, but no major engagements have yet been struck between the previous allies. We also don't know how interested the Imperium may or may not be in this war, given that they have a vested interest in keeping their diplomatic agreements with Test in the south, which allow them to keep Quirius relatively safe from incursion, and also in getting a little bit of revenge on CO2 in the short term. Not to mention potentially fighting Pandemic Legion without the supercapitals which proved so decisive in their fights in the north. And then, finally, we just don't know how much GigX is going to be willing to sacrifice from both his own alliance and his own wallet when it comes to this war, is he willing to let CO2 burn just to prove a point? Or if he ends up politically outmaneuvered, will he take his L, find an agreement to extract his stuff, and strike out elsewhere? Currently, however, CO2 and Tri are fighting a very defensive war, attempting to hold onto Impasse and Fetherbolis against Intosh's pressure from all sides in the conflict as they attempt to attack FCON's nearby fortizars and push the front lines back. So far, however, any attempts to make an offensive strategic push by the as of yet unnamed coalition have been met with failure, with CO2 and Vanguard forces often finding themselves split apart by strategic maneuvering from the DRF-aligned forces, preventing a clean and favourable engagement. One final point of interest is the 37S-KO Keepstar, which was entering its third timer earlier this week. This Keepstar was owned by Good Sax, which is an ex-member of the Steinwagen Coalition, which you might remember from the Winter War just 6 months ago. Despite a sizable numbers advantage and dropping a good portion of its super fleet onto the Keepstar, Test were unable to secure the victory here and destroy the Keepstar, letting it reset all the way back to the beginning of its 3 timers. Reasons for this vary, but one of the main ones seems to be the intervention of Pandemic Legion. And whilst as of yet this doesn't tell us quite whose side they're on, or if they're just deploying down here from content, it does show that PL is ready and waiting to take any content that comes their way. With this overview done, I'm going to leave you for now. However, in the future I hope to come and try and give more of a blow-by-blow account if I possibly can. If you want to talk to me and try and give me intel, please feel free to hit me up at any of the contact details above. And above all, thank you for watching and fly smart.